File whenever you think appropriate.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. Before we start our Shastrarth today on abusive RPTs and the risks that the compliance officers face with respect to abusive RPTs, I'll just confirm. So, Rish, if you can confirm if the recording is on, since we'll be uploading it on YouTube as well.
Yes, that is on.
Okay.
And
So,
while you would be using the PPT, you can maybe turn the PPT on.
yes, I'll just put it on the screen. The PPT is visible.
Yes, it is. You can give it a start.
Yes. Today's Shastrarth is on compliance officers' risks in abusive RPT structures. And RPTs, while it is a topic which is always of relevance and something which is a favorite amongst all regulators, this topic is recently gaining more traction because of the recent settlement orders of SEBI. Before we discuss on on the different types of abusive RPT structures, and we have also listed out some examples of how a structure can be considered as an abusive RPT structures, and we will try to give some guidance on to the compliance officers also on how they can identify or what are the minimum safeguards that they can adopt with respect to abusive RPT structures. Uh, Before that, sir, would you want to just brief us, give us an idea on what exactly are abusive RPTs? When do I say that an RPT is an abusive RPT?
Correct. And that's very important. File that's the most important question to start with because RPT itself doesn't mean anything wrong. RPTs are a way of life for companies, and the way companies are structured, related party transactions are almost inevitable because quite often we create subsidiaries and we create associates for different business purposes, which are to be handled through subsidies, associates, joint ventures, whether within the country or outside. And that's therefore a part of business model. These are not what you call abusive. So I've used the two terms abusive versus efficient or abusive versus non-abusive. RPT itself is not necessarily abusive, but that's not where the concern is. Concern A might be purely procedural that you did not take approval of some RPTs, even though it was perfectly genuine. It was perfectly in interest of the company, but you did not take an approval. So if you were to have proper RPT controls in the entity, that we have done a proper rigorous identification of related parties, and we have internal controls whereby transactions are flagged so that they don't happen across the country anywhere without the without the involvement of the compliance officer to make sure that the transactions are either pre-approved by audit committee or they're within the approval limits. That's a question of internal control. I think today's session is not on the internal controls. Today we are very specifically focusing on I have tried to do everything and yet transactions were designed so as to be beyond the radar. They never came to me or they came to me but I couldn't understand what the transaction is all about. I'm the compliance officer and therefore I, in SEBI's balance, have failed to protect the interests of the listed entity, and therefore I become the scapegoat. So, in more cases than not, the compliance officer is the scapegoat. He's the Balika Bakra, not like the one who, not the Hatyara. The Hatyara is someone else. The money is being made by someone else. I'm simply getting into the entire fray as a pig in the middle. And mostly, and this is something that I've mentioned several times in all my posts as well, that if a transaction is indeed abusive, it is done with the design to funnel out or tunnel out money from the company. No one would do it in a blatant manner so that it might be visible to a naked eye. transaction would not be structured so stupidly or so blatantly that anyone can just quickly see and, oh, see, I can smell it, it's wrong. Transaction would be designed so as to smell absolutely fantastic. I mean, it would be smelling like any other transaction. Yet, if one were to go into the ultimate result of the transaction, it would deplete the wealth of the listed entity. So the first question is, what exactly is abusive? So I think simple issue is something which is depleting the resources of the listed entity, putting adverse impact on the interests of stakeholders of listed entity. That's abusive. When there could be innumerable ways through which it could be done. And this is another thing that I've repeated earlier as well, that can we sort of do a precast 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of listing of so-called abusive RPTs. If it was possible to list out what all ways one can steal wealth, if it was possible to list out what all ways one can organize a heist, then probably I could list out RPTs too. But every time one makes a so-called abusive RPT, one tries to structure it in a manner so that the structure is looking perfectly pristine. So that's the ingenuity. I mean, ingenuity of a person who is structuring a transaction is much better than the person who can catch it, particularly the compliance officer. That the transaction would rarely be visible on the face of it as a blatantly bad transaction. So we're talking about a battle of wits here, where I am simply reviewing a transaction. Someone has structured the transaction and he knows far more than I do. And yet I'm supposed to safeguard the interests of the listener entity. So I understand that I'm at an extremely bad position here. But nevertheless, we also understand that when it comes to SEBI, SEBI finds the easiest person to catch. As Chanakya would have said it, no? If the trees which are straight enough in a jungle, if trees are to be cut, which trees would be cut first? The ones which are straight. And the compliance officer is so very straight and so very simple that he's probably the first tree to be cut. Unfortunately, that's how it is, because SEBI has found the easiest target, which is the one level below the board of directors, the compliance officer, the exalted authority of the compliance officer. And SEBI says, you are the person, you are responsible, you are so senior that we treat you as one level below the board, so you should be responsible. And we are not getting into the philosophy or sophistry behind it, Pile, but question is, what exactly is abusive? So I can, like I said, while I can never list it, but I'll talk about some of the features of so-called abusive RPTs. Number one, it depletes the wealth of the listed entity. Number two, it creates undue cost on the listed entity. Number three, it limits or obstructs the market share or the source of profits of the listed entity. It creates a profit share for someone else at my cost. Someone which would have duly been my source of profit, it takes that out. It results into impairment losses for the company. The intellectual property or the key intangible wealth of the entity is moved out. Quite often by moving out intangible properties, quite often by moving out trademarks, or quite often by moving out assets which are so integral to the company's continued existence. Then it creates an undue burden, non-cancelable contracts which create an undue burden on the listed entity. Contracts which in normal parlance would have been cancelable, it creates non-cancelable contracts, exposing the listed entity to a cancellation penalty. And finally, listed entity might be entering into transactions where the intent is that after creating a transaction, after creating a source of profit, the listed entity moves out either by desubsidiarization or moving out of a joint venture, so that I leave the source of profit to someone else. When by design, I'm entering into something, create a source of profit, then I'll quietly move out, leaving the source of profit to the related parties. Who are the related parties? Mostly, once again, this is something that we've repeated time and again. As long as resources are flowing downstream meaning to the wholly owned, not even the partly owned subsidiaries, to the wholly owned subsidiaries. Normally, we do not see, and of course, we'll go and talk about the wholly owned subsidiary issue also here, Payal. This is one very specific issue that we've recently seen as one of the most commonly used ways of abusive RPTs, used to abuse And that's the most common way we've seen is to use the wholly owned subsidiary relations. We'll talk about that though. But mostly if resources are flowing downstream, we don't see concern. Resources start moving upstream. Upstream meaning who? The promoters, promoter group. That's where we see concern. So the concern mostly is something done whereby we create a source of profit, we create a drain on the listed entity, moving money starts moving up to the promoter group. That's exactly where we say that's an abusive RPT. While I think let's maybe initial discussion basis this quick background. And of course, we will intend to involve all of you in active discussion. So please feel free to interfere. But I think let's move it for some stage before we can take to some sort of Q&As. Pile, go ahead.
Yes. So, Sari said that generally speaking, if I'm talking about moving benefits to downstream entities or doing transactions with downstream entities, more particularly a wholly owned subsidiary, it may not be much of a concern. But then, when it comes to transactions with wholly owned subsidiaries, we do understand the regulators also provide all sorts of exemptions. The audit committee's approval is not required. Shareholders' approval is not required when it comes to a listed entity. In case of unlisted entities, again, similar exemptions are given by way of Section 177, subject to a condition that the transaction is not one that is qualifying under Section 188, which means it's not a transaction which is not at an arm's length basis. So, in this context, we will discuss a few transactions between the holding company and holding subsidiary to see if there are any concerns or any chances of uh, considering the same as abusive RPTs. So, our first example is, let's say a listed holding company is transferring assets to its wholly owned subsidiary, and the value of transfer is lower than the market value of such assets. So from listed company, assets are flowing to wholly owned subsidiary at a lower value than what would be the market value of such assets. Are there any concerns given the accounts will anyways be consolidated with the holding company?
So, Pile, first of all, I make a generic point that regulators have provided an exemption for transaction between the holdco and the wholly owned subsidiary. And to my mind, that's a big mistake. I don't see any reason why this exemption should have been given because that's like we're saying we have allowed an ingenuous play to every concerned party to make use of this because these transactions don't come into the radar at all. These transactions are often not even presented to audit committee, saying that these transactions are exempt from audit committee's approval. So first point I'm saying, while this is exempt as per regulation, but every compliance officer must make it a practice that all transactions between Holdco and WSS are also put to audit committee. Who else will affirm the arm's length nature of transaction? Is it okay for a transaction to happen other than on arm's length basis, even though the transaction is between the holdco and the wholly owned subsidiary? After all, we are delineated by way of legal entities. The holding company might be the whole owner of the WS, but the legal entity is different. For example, even think, let's say, from the worst possible scenario, the insolvency occurs. Are we saying the wealth of the subsidiary is the wealth of the holdco? Because insolvency laws in India do not allow commingling of assets between the holdco and subsidiary. Even if it's a group insolvency, I'm not supposed to lift or pierce the corporate veil and lift out the assets of the subsidiary to use it for the creditors of the holdco. Vice versa also not true. So the moment we talk about legal entities, we are bound by the peripheries of the corporate entity. My entity is different, the subsidiary entity is different. As the compliance officer or board of directors of the holdco, I'm supposed to safeguard the assets of my company. The fact that the resources are moving to a subsidiary, how does that answer my concern of not safeguarding the assets of my company? So when it comes to related parties from the RPTs, the view should not only be group wide, the view should also be entity restricted. On entity level basis as also on group level basis, is the transaction making sense? And when I say transaction is making sense, in my view, one condition which runs through the entire spectrum of RPTs is arm's length. No RPT, irrespective of whether it's exempt or subject to approval, can be anything other than arm's length. Arm's length is a precondition like a Brahma Vakya that you could never forget. So even if it's a transaction with a wholly owned subsidiary, in my view, it has to be arm's length still. And Payal, you are aware that NEFRA has sent out requisitions to auditors asking them to establish how transactions with wholly owned subsidiaries were done on arm's length basis. So arm's length is some point which even DEFRA is going to check. So even transactions with the whole between the holdco and the subsidy need to be arm's length. Vice versa is even more true. Transactions between the subsidy to holdco. That also people will argue, look at the regulation. No, it doesn't require approval. It doesn't require approval, understand. But you need to. Are we saying that we take the audit committee's approval only for those transactions which take approval, which require approval? See, please understand that prudence, proper principles of corporate governance are not delimited to the regulatory requirements. You can go beyond it. As a wise compliance officer, you should lay a discipline that even transaction between the holdco and the subsidy should both way be regulated. They'll be brought to the audit committee. I don't have to report it, I understand. I don't know whether for reporting purposes, even that exemption is actually applicable. Probably is not. But the issue is quite simple that I will anyway bring it to the audit committee, even though it's an exempt transaction. So in the example that you gave, Payal, if money is moving, assets are being transferred from the holdco to subsidy at less than market value. It's the same as saying that the wealth is going from the holdco to subsidy without any consideration. I'm transferring assets without any consideration. This is what I will call undervalue transaction. It will be questioned from every perspective, including RPTs. Therefore, as a compliance officer, I should never permit that. So I'm making two important points. I understand it's exempt. However, please bring it to audit committee and get the audit committee's, sign off on whether this transaction is arm's length. Because even transactions between the holdco and the WS also need to be equally as arm's length as any other RPT file.
Thanks. Another example. So let's say, for example, the holding company is subscribing to the shares of its partially owned subsidiary, and the subscription value is higher than the fair value of such shares. Are there any concerns on this?
The subscription to shares of a partly owned subsidiary at a value which is much higher than the actual intrinsic value of the shares is very clear and blatant case of a resource moving out. Take an example. Let's say I'm a 60% owner of the capital of the subsidiary. The remaining 40 is with someone else. Who is that someone else? That's the other person holding 40% share, which could probably be the promoter block. Assuming I am moving out 100 crores by way of an undervalued or overvalued investment. Here, what I'm trying to do, I'm putting money by way of an overvalued investment. I'm paying far more consideration than the actual value that I'm getting, which is almost like saying that I'm transferring wealth for good. I'm transferring wealth for nothing. I've transferred out 100 crores. 60% is my share. I'm getting 60 crores. Remaining 40 goes to remaining 40 is going to the promoters. So this is a very clear, quite a blatant case of misuse of the device of RPTs. This is anyway not exempt. And in any case, there is no question of the audit committee approving such a transaction. I'll take a little more subtle example, Payal. Think of a case where a subsidy is moving assets to holding company, similar to your example. And the subsidy is moving, let's say, an asset which is having a fair value of 600 crores at a value of 100 crores. It's transferring asset from subsidy to holdco at undervalued consideration. Do we see a concern there? Absolutely, yes. Because once again, try understanding the subsidy is ring-fenced by its own corporate entity. Anyone who has a claim against subsidy cannot claim the money from the holdco. Therefore, to the extent I've transferred 500 crores extra without any consideration, I've done what? I've drained out the subsidy of 500 crores of wealth. So to the extent I've actually caused a very clear detriment to the creditors of subsidy. When we talk about RPTs, we are not concerned with interests of shareholders only. We're looking at interests of shareholders and all stakeholders, primarily the creditors. So I've taken creditors' wealth out from the subsidy to the holdco, parked money in the holdco, where there might, of course, be several interested parties. But I have drained out 500 crores from the subsidy without any consideration. This is a very clear, though it's exempt, one would argue it doesn't need the approval of audit committee. I would say, please bring it to audit committee. Let the audit committee do a sign off. So as a compliance officer, I think one of the central points which is coming or which probably has to come out of this entire discussion is how to safeguard your interests. See, the best way to safeguard your interests is please bring the transaction to audit committee with full disclosure. Insist proper disclosure is done. Let the audit committee approve. So you are taking it through a process of scrutiny. You are bringing it through a process That process itself is safeguard. But quite often, this audit committee's question itself will deter the transaction. Or the management will probably withdraw the case itself because the audit committee will ask sharp questions. So always ensure that even though it may not be needed, I'm not saying bring every transaction to audit committee, but if you are able to smell that there is a design in the transaction that you are not liking particularly transaction between transactions which are exempt as per regulation, bring it to the audit committee still. That is a strong suggestion I would like to give. Payal, you can move on.
Yes, sir. In the in the second example where we were talking about subscription of shares at a higher value than the fair value, we were talking about a partly owned subsidiary, so there is no exemption. Had it been a case of a wholly owned subsidiary, do you still see a concern there?
I just talked about that, Payal, that if money is going out from the subsidy to the holdco, any transfer of, so the moment I'm breaching the borders of the legal entity and transferring wealth to another entity which is though part of my group but still not a part of my legal entity, by legal entity principle I'm still moving the money out. So like I said, RPTs is not merely group wide RPT is entity wide as well as group wide. I have to be looking at both entity interests as also group interests. I cannot take a group wide interest that ultimately it's my group. How does it matter? No, that's not a correct view on RPTs at all. Why? Because you'll probably see when I'm transferring wealth to the wholly owned subsidy, and I'm sure, Payal, you're talking about one such example later as well. Somebody will thereafter quietly bring a proposal for issue of further shares by subsidy, where the subsidy will cease to be my wholly owned subsidy. I've seen this in practice quite often happening. Design is that we'll move out some price assets from the company. So we first do a scheme of arrangement, move that price asset into a wholly owned subsidy. No one sees it. Sir, it's happening through a scheme of arrangement. Ultimately, my own WS. So how does it matter? My wealth, ye pocket mein hai ki wo pocket mein, how does it make a difference? So I park the price asset or price business into another entity. Then periodically over a period of time that subsidy starts, oh, we have resource crunch, so we don't need more funds. The holdco is not subscribing. I'll issue the shares to someone else. And slowly that subsidy will start getting into the desubsidization modes. After some time, you'll find the so-called WS has now become only an associate. File you can move on.
Yeah. Another example, taking a WS into picture. So it's a very complicated structure. So I would just maybe brief on the major parts here. RS Powers Limited is the listed company, and there's a proposal to give loans to RS Renew, which is a wholly owned subsidiary. The wholly owned subsidiary in turn will give loans to ARS, which is a 60% subsidiary of the wholly owned subsidiary. Now, if we see the structure here, this ARS, 40%, the remaining 40% is held by AZB Tech. And if I were to just, go above, the end beneficiary or the ultimate beneficiary here is R Gupta and S Gupta, who we can see are actually the promoters of this listed company. The simple question is whether RS Powers Limited can give this loan to RS Renew, considering that it's a wholly owned subsidiary and it will be using it to give it back to its step down subsidiary.
Unless someone was to completely close your eyes and be completely tunnel visioned, this case, though it looks complicated, but I think it looks blatant enough. Because money is moving from RS Powers to RS Renew, from where the money is going into ARS. In ARS, I don't have 100% stake. There's a 40% stake with AGNB Tech, which is ultimately folding back into R Gupta. And you see the 50% stake in AZ Tech is also with employees of SMR. Employees of SMR are not my employees. These are also employees of another entity where R Gupta and S Gupta are holding ultimate stake. So basically, this entire device is simply moving money from RS Powers to ARS, which is only 60% my share. Remaining 40% is with the promoters. So the point that I think as a part of design, this is once again a type. If you were to talk about transaction types, using the WS structure is one very common design. Very common design because those transactions don't come to scrutiny of the audit committee. Another transaction design, which is also very common, is to create some business or some affiliation with partly owned entity of the kind that you've shown here, where to the audit committee is saying that we will have a tremendous business interest As we do business with an affiliate, which is an associate, then that associate I'll have, for example, 30, 40, 40% share, remaining share with other promoter entities. So I'm doing what? I'm transferring money from my company into a so-called affiliate where my share is limited and the remaining share is moving out to promoter entities. So we created a tunnel. We created a tunnel whereby money is moving from my company and moving up to promoter entities. This is something that one should be always careful whenever you're getting into transactions where there is some kind of associate, affiliate, or JV kind of an entity where other entities are from the promoter group. Now, once again, people will design it such that on the face of it, it doesn't seem to be falling in definition of related party. I would once again say take a very good view there because don't be stuck by definitions. Look beyond the definition, see who is the real beneficiary of that entity. If you see promoter group entities, please take your best what do you call best ability, best inspection of the transaction to see the realities, see the intrinsic, the person who are actually so-called ultimate beneficiaries of the transaction, and then take you. Don't be stuck by technicalities. When it comes to RPTs, another point that I'll very strongly mention is that don't be stuck by technicalities. Definition of related party, definition of RPT, definition of whether it's exempt or requires approval. Don't be stuck by technicalities. It's a question of conflict of interest. In something which deals with conflict of interest, don't be bound by language. But the moment you become slaves of language, it would be very easy to create a structure which is not falling in the language. So it's simply giving the option to someone to create a structure which is not falling within your language. And therefore, you are able to exploit the language. So that's another very important lesson. Don't be stuck by technicalities. While you can move on.
Yeah. Another question in these cases pertains to transactions of past periods where there might be some changes or some sort of discontinuance. So, our first example on impairment of investments. The investments were made in related parties during financial year 21-22. At that point of time, it was done at the fair value, and all sorts of approvals and everything was kept in place. Subsequently, the investments have lost their value and has been impaired 100% during financial year 24-25. Are there any actions required at the stage of impairment, or do I consider it a continuance of the existing transaction?
So once again, I would say, Pile, people get mostly fixated with the language and they look at the language and say transaction means what? Transfer of resources, services, and obligations. Neither am I transferring resource, nor am I transferring a service, nor am I transferring an obligation. All I'm doing is an existing investment is being impaired and written off. So this something, why does it have to come to audit committee? It's not a transaction at all. And therefore, it doesn't need to come to the audit committee at all. This is absolutely, I would say, extremely tunnel vision view. Investment was made. When the investment was made, we gave all sorts of projections and kind of business forecast to say this investment is going to bring results to the investing entity. I'm the investing entity. I would have invested money with some expectation. Once the money goes into the so-called investee, from there it starts draining out. The money is slowly taken out, and the money is now that investing company is now completely drained out. And one financially will suddenly do an impairment. You'll probably say this transaction does not come to audit committee. It's a very important point. If it's a related party transaction, I have an asset, I have a value. I'm writing that value down. What else is it? It's a transfer of resource. It's a kind of impairment of a resource. My asset is my resource. When we say transfer of resource, giving up a resource, giving up a right, giving up any legal right, that's also equally a transfer of resource. What else is it? In fact, I think this is one lesson we can very easily learn from each of this. In fact, from both of the recent adjudication orders of SEBI, both have some degree of writing down the value of investments. So it's a very significant point. You need to be extremely cautious about these. There is no transfer in this period, but I'm doing an impairment in this period. The impairment is being done of a transaction with a related party. It has to come to audit committee. But then the audit committee will be there to ask sharp questions. What happened to the investment? Where was the money drained out? Who took the money away? The audit committee will have this transaction, I would say, because it was an investment, Even otherwise, by virtue of the very obligation of the audit committee, every year the investment should have come for scrutiny of the audit committee. This is one of the very clear requirements of Section 177, is also LODR regulations. Investments made by the holdco in subsidies must regularly be reviewed by the audit committee. But assuming the audit committee reviewed, but they did not take any action. In the year in which we're doing impairment, they should surely come to audit committee for them to ask pertinent question. So in my view, the act of impairment is also an RPT and needs to come to the audit committee. While
So
I
I
think
would
your next
just
question is
extend this
seeming,
question.
yeah, the
Yeah.
related question, correct.
Yeah. So if I were to say that the investments were done at a time when the entity was not a related party, and subsequently the impairment is being done at a time when the entity has become a related party, can I say that the transaction was entered into prior to the entity becoming a related party and hence does not warrant audit committee scrutiny?
So two things, Pal. Number one, most common thing that we have seen in practice is that investment was done either prior to the RPT provisions coming into force. It's investment done in 2014. So investment was long, but made longer. Issue is not with the making of investment. Investment was done probably for good reason. Subsequent to the making of investment and resources getting into the investee, from there the money started flowing out. It's the draining of money in from the investee. That's the issue. So I will not be constrained by whether the party was a related party, not a related party. What I will see is what happened to the investment. I had made a good value. I had parted with good value in the investee, from where the money started moving out. In what way? Why did it move out? So my question would be on the what you call squeezing of the money out from the investee, leaving it high and dry. That's my concern. So there I would not be delimited by the technicalities of whether it was related party or not. That's once again being bound by technicalities.
Thanks, sir. Another example, since investments also fall under the purview of audit committee's powers because of the requirement to scrutinize intercorporate loans and investments. This example pertains to writing off of advances. So let's say, for example, the company had given an advance payment for some sort of contract for availing of services, and such services could not be rendered by the service provider related party for some reasons. And the amount that was already paid by the company, all the services were not received since the amount was already paid. The amount is now being written off in the books of the company, subsequently, let's say financial year 24-25. Does this amount to a transaction that requires scrutiny and
Very
discussion?
surely, yes, because I'm giving up a right. If I was saying it was all this while it was shown as money recoverable or value receivable, now I'm writing it off, meaning I'm taking the conscious act that now I will no more have any right of receiving the money. So I'm giving up my right. That also is a transaction of mine. Transaction does not have to be seen as an active transfer. Transfer is not necessarily an active action. I decide not to recover, that's also transfer because I will not take the steps to recover money anyway. That's also not in any manner anything less than a transfer. So I would look at this as well. I think while on the point, we can probably also say that if I have far more liberal or lax policies in recovering my receivables from related parties than I do with unrelated parties. Let's say goods and services sold to related parties, the money is outstanding for months and months. Whereas for any unrelated party, I would probably follow a strict policy of stopping further supply once the receivables go beyond 90 days. With my related parties, I've got no concern. Their receivables are piling up. That's also nothing but an abusive RPT. When I'm creating a receivable from a related party, giving them the benefit of trading on my money. My working capital is blocked. The related parties freely trading on my money. Whether I give unreasonable advances to related parties or do not recover money which has become recoverable from related parties, I'm giving them the benefit of trading on my money free of cost. I'm paying cost to my bankers. Related parties paying nothing to me. So that's also one way of passing a benefit over to them. But I'll not be so I'm not even able to talk about what could be the various ways in which money could be drained out. There's no way by which I can limit the number of ways. Number of ways would be whatever can catch the imagination of the person who's trying to do the design. Good.
Another example on allocation of rights, there's no actual assets or liabilities which are being transferred here. So there are two fellow subsidiaries. One is a listed company, another is an unlisted company. And there's a business allocation agreement between the two, such that there's a segment split. Some activities will not be done by a particular entity. Similarly, geographical split. Some market areas will not be served by a particular entity. Both these fellow subsidiaries are relinquishing their rights to business with respect to some activities or some geographical market split in a way that the projected business loss to each of these entities would be 250 crores on OP Pharma and 75 crores on PSR Pharma. Since there are no assets and liabilities being transferred, hence no consideration is being charged by either of the entity. Is it fair? Are there any concerns around this?
I think by now this is quite well read and well talked about case. We don't even need to talk about the name of the case. It's quite well read already. And the issue here is quite simple. The issue is there's a very common device used by moving the cash cow out. I'm trying to move the cash cow, the source of profit, the price asset, the prime asset, or the attractive asset, which is resulting to the value in my company. I'm trying to move it out so that that value starts accruing to my related party. So as you, I think the numbers are very clearly illustrated. The projected economic impact to OP Pharma is 250, whereas to the other parties 75, which means I am suffering a far more damage than the related party. And therefore, this is disproportional allocation of value loss to my company, which is same as value being lost at my company's end. So very clearly an abusive RPT panel.
Another example where we talk about not an active participation in the sense of, not an active participation in the sense of the holding company doing something, but rather not doing something. So the case here is LKS Limited is the listed company which is holding 65% stake in LM Private Limited. LM Private Limited, remaining 35% is held by VGL Limited, which is a promoter group entity of listed entity. Subsequently, LM Private Limited brings a rights issue of shares and rights issue, let's say it is at the face value of shares. And LKS Limited decides not to subscribe to the shares. There may be two possibilities. One is it renounces its rights in favor of some other entity. Another is it remains inactive,
There's no
and
such
in
thing.
which case it is on the board to decide how to dispose
Offload
of
the
or deal
shares.
with such shares. And here in this case, the board of the subsidiary has decided to issue the remaining unallotted shares to another promoter group entity. The net result is such that the percentage holding of LKS Limited listed entity
Has come
reduces
down.
to somewhere around 32%, and the other entity holds a significant stake in the company. Does it?
Once again, if you go by technicality, Payal, one would say, where is the transaction? But one would go by the strict word of transaction means transfer of resource. I never inducted resource. I did not subscribe to the shares. So where is the transaction of, where is the transaction at all? People will say, because there's no transaction, it would not come to my audit committee. I think once again, we're making the same mistake. We're being delimited to words. I think simplest lesson I would like to give is please don't get restricted or limited to the language. Don't be slaves of language. Try to see what's happening. And I think time and again, I'm reminded our participants who are participating today will probably ask the question, how do I get to know? These things don't come to me. How do I get to know? So please understand two things. Number one, by the very hierarchy which SEBI has now prescribed, you are a fairly senior person. You are one level below the board. So you can't be complaining that I am a bacha. I don't even know. I'm not even consulted. You are not a bacha because you've been put in that position, number one. Please understand and appreciate your position. You're quite senior person. Number two, I may pretend as if I don't know, but the the portents or the indication that something significant is happening may still be available to you some way, because after all, it's everything is designed in the organization. While you may not be part of the strategy committee which designs all these things, but for some way or the other, these things come to you. And therefore, try to connect all the dots together to see the holistic picture. The biggest mistake is we don't connect the dots together. We look at only, I'm not subscribing shares. Therefore, there's no transaction from my point. And therefore, period, I'm not concerned with this at all. That's the biggest mistake. You're letting go your right, you're letting go your control over the subsidy. The subsidy was your value. That value has now become your partly on, in fact, not even your subsidy. You lost your control altogether. So losing of control, that's a transfer of resource. Resource includes control as well. Man, I wouldn't be able to prescribe so many things which are not included by the language. So once again, I would say the simplest rule is do not look at simply the technical wording of the regulation. Look at what exactly is happening. So I would say this argument that I'm not mostly involved in these things. Don't these things don't even come to me. How do I get to understand what's happening within the behind the screen? That would mean we're probably, to an extent, you might still be right because you may not be privy to everything which is discussed in the boardroom or in the strategy room. But we have every entitlement to ask wise questions. We should ask the question. We try to connect the dots together to see the full picture. If I'm told that you don't have right to ask full picture, then I would say I will raise my hand before the audit committee and say that I don't have the full picture. Therefore, I wouldn't be able to give a clear agenda note to the audit committee, or I'll do it with the reservation that the following facts, which I had asked, were not revealed to me. Let the management make the case to audit committee. If the audit committee also approves something despite you giving your reservation, then you are out. Your biggest defense is that you brought it to the audit committee approved it. That absolves you altogether. You have tried to bring the facts to the audit committee approved it, that absolves you. But the matter was not even brought to audit committee. Now, can we lay the blame on the audit committee? Why did you not see the transaction? It had to be brought to the audit committee, no? And for that, the anchor person is the compliance officer. So it wouldn't be easy in today's scenario for the compliance officer to use this defense that I am a bacha in the organization. I am not aware of lots of things. I need to be aware. That's a part of my responsibility, which is associated with this crown that we put on our head, calling ourselves the KMP. Right.
Yes. So I think those were the examples that we gave, and these are some of the recent matters where SEBI has adjudicated or settled cases relating to violation of RPTs, primarily in the nature of abusive RPTs and not only procedural non-compliances. So, so
This
you
file, you
want,
can maybe
yeah.
quickly brief on these cases.
So one of the most recent ones is in the matter of Zuari
When you
Agro
say most
Chemicals,
recent,
where
how recent is this? How
this
recent
is
is it?
5th March 2026. So just 10 days back, this settlement order has come. And yeah, the point that we were trying to make earlier, that it is not only, it is not only transfer of assets at a lower value from the holdco to the subsidiary, but the other way around also is what point SEBI has made here. Because one of the points were transfer of certain business under slum seal to holding subsidiary at an exceptional gains. So the listed company is making gains, but the gains were so exceptional that SEBI has pointed this out. There were misrepresentation and financial statements since these were considered as abusive, deceptive structures which have been formed. And the penalty was levied and hence settlement amount has been paid not only by the company or its time director, but also by the CS and the CFO of the company, citing their responsibility to bring the transaction for the relevant approvals as well as ensuring the proper disclosures in the financial statements, etc. So a very important, very recent order. Another, and I think it has made news all over LinkedIn, and every compliance officer is well aware of it, is in the matter of Kalyani Steels Limited, where again, notice the pattern. Here, the questions have been raised on investments made by listed company and promoter group companies having nil operations, negative network. There were no reasons. You could not substantiate why you made these investments, and subsequently, these investments have been impaired. Maybe in the same year, maybe in 2, 3 years of making such investments. So here again, it was settlement amount paid by the compliance officer was approximately 1 crore. So quite a hefty amount to be paid. Another similar matter, Venmex drugs and pharmaceuticals. Here, and this extends to RP identification as well, because it pertains to transactions with private company in which the managing director of the listed company was an independent director. Now, private companies, usually speaking, they are not required to appoint independent directors, but those facts are not a part of the ruling and not very relevant in our case. But yes, uh, giving this argument that since it's an independent director is just an honorary position, does not have an involvement in the day-to-day affairs of the company. Those arguments were not accepted. Rather, in this particular case, the transactions were such that while there were recorded purchase and sales, there were trade receivables pending for a very long time. But there were no delivery receipts, no acknowledgement proofs to say that there has been an actual delivery of machinery or the goods or assets which were being dealt with. Hence, in this case, it was ultimately concluded that the transactions were merely book entries and resulted in misrepresentation in financial statements and required penalty on the part of penalty by SEBI to the companies. So these were some of the examples of recent cases that have actually happened and actually been adjudicated by SEBI. Now, sir, here, since we are talking about settlement amounts being paid by the CS and CFO as well, the KMPs, uh, who are the professionals who are dealing with the company, the professionals who have attended the session here. Uh, do you think the D&O insurance, the directors and officers insurance, in any way helps in these kind of transactions and structures? And can the compliance officer relax, keeping this in mind that the company has a D&O insurance in place, and if at all something happens, the D&O insurance will cover this? Over to you, sir.
I would cite something from Gita, which I think I'd cited earlier as well. Sambhavitasya chakirti maranadat atirichate. For a budding professional, lack of reputational loss is even worse than death. So you can have a D&O insurance which covers you for the monetary damage. Does it cover you for the reputational damage? The reputational damage lives with you throughout the life. No matter where you go, look at the kind of adverse publicity that these two adjudication cases are having today on all our social media. But people have gone to the extent of crafting some imaginary picture of the person also. It's weird. But then people have done that. So question is reputational loss. How do I recover that from insurance company? That's my property forever. So D&O insurance would still be needed so that you can actually recover the 95 lakhs that you pay. It would not help you to recover your reputational loss. That's almost like death. It's the death of a professional career. But that's something which you, and I think everyone is most concerned with that. There's no insurance against that.
At this moment, sir, I think we pause for questions from
There
the
is one
participants.
question I saw in the chat. And
Yeah,
well,
just
others, if they have any question, please feel free. But I saw one question in the chat.
I'll just read that out. Yes. Lakshmi ma'am has a question. How would RPT approvals be taken for impairment of investments? Because impairment would be known only when the financials are finalized. And at least in case of Companies Act, we have time period of 3 months to take the approval if it is necessary. But how do you ensure
The
prior
impairment,
approval under
the
relevant
act of impairment itself is taken at a board meeting. No? You can't impair investment without a board meeting. The act of impairment itself requires a board resolution. If it's an impairment of an investment in a related party, then before the board says yes, it should be taken to audit committee. So it's an action. It definitely requires the board and therefore the audit committee's approval as well. The board should not approve it because it's an impairment of a related party investment. The board should not approve it without taking the view of the audit committee. And the audit committee must do its own homework in trying to see what happened to the investment. Where did the money actually get drained out? Impairment can only be done at the on the no write-off of assets. Typically, I would say any write-off of assets requires board approval. Because you're writing off the company's assets unless it's a very routine, for example, let's say write-off of usual office waste or factory waste. Other than that, anything which is significant, impairment of any asset requires approval of board. And if it's resulting into a claim against a related party going down, it needs to come to the audit committee as well.
Thank you, sir. In case any participant would like to unmute and ask questions, you may ask.
Hi, thank you. Can I go ahead?
Yes, sir.
Just volume. Hi Vinodji, Nitin Bagadia here.
Oh, hi, Vinji.
Hi, long time. Couple of comments actually in a good presentation. Thank you for taking on this time. Now, in the recent orders, I did not read anything about the secretarial auditor or the stat auditor being pulled up, and I understand their institute
इसमें आपको
might.
क्या तकलीफ है नितिन जी? I know वो भी दिन दूर नहीं है नितिन जी.
So my point is, I understand their institute will be able to do something on this, but may not be the authorities directly. But my first question is, typically the secretarial auditor will ask for a management representation letter from the company secretary. Now,
That's the
even
easiest thing as auditor can take a
sorry,
letter from the.
yeah,
I'm saying
back to
that's
back.
the easiest thing that secretarial auditor can take. But see, Nitin, yeah, but please come to the question, then I'll give my
So
comments.
my
Please finish
question
your
is,
question.
should we have a practice of the some points being certified by the maybe the CFO instead of the compliance officer in terms of under the LODR when furnishing this letter to the secretarial auditor? Uh, yeah.
If you're referring to the management representation letter, I think
Yes.
typically I would say normally it's signed by the compliance officer. Compliance officer in turn, this is if it's an RPT which has come to the audit committee, every RPT which is requiring industry standard note procedure is also backed by a certificate both from the CEO and the CFO that the RPT is in the interest of the listed entity. So these are anyway coming along with the CFO certificate. You are simply saying the secretarial auditor should be expecting a sign off of the CFO. That thing, I think, probably to my mind, asking a little something overboard. But internally, the compliance officer who gives the so-called management representation letter is also doing it on the basis of internal confirmations.
No, so
So I
my
think that's,
question was not, I was talking more about should the compliance officer start this practice of
of course, yes.
asking, that
And
was
and
number
and
one. Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, the
So I got
compliance
your
officer
answer.
definitely yes. My
Yeah,
answer is very clearly yes, because every RPT that goes to audit committee goes with this confirmation from the CFO and the CEO
yeah.
of the transaction not being against the interest of the listed entity. And therefore, this is a part of standard process anyway now.
Yeah. Secondly, both in example one and two, the challenge that compliance officer faces, Vinod ji, is that since within the management it is known that WOS transactions are exempt from taking audit committee approval. Therefore, they don't come to the knowledge of compliance officer unless you are reaching the stage of annual report preparation. So that is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to WOS. That is again one of my comments. I'll move to the next comment is that, on example number one, a simple way to, do it is to go through a demerger of the undertaking and run through the NCLT process with a wholly owned subsidiary. And then there is no question of what valuation the asset was transferred from WOS to the holding. Also, on the last point I would mention is that in Bata, if I talk about my RPT policy, basically we have casted a responsibility on the management to bring all RPT and a list of RPT to the audit committee. And therefore, the audit committee need not go into and do an investigation of whether a certain party is a related party or not, and a certain transaction is going to be, because now with the extended arm of related party transaction being done for the benefit of a related party with a third party, the onus has to be on the management to bring it to the knowledge of the audit committee. Otherwise, the audit committee will never come to know that the ultimate benefit is going to be a third party in this case. So thank you for patiently listening. These were my comments.
You want me to give my responses on each of these
Please.
three? Okay. I would want to. So
Okay.
first point, putting it as a part of the RPT policy that the obligation of bringing the list of related parties and RPTs is on the management is saying the most, I mean, that's the most intuitive thing to say. That's anyway intuitive. That does not, however, absolve the audit committee audit committee's oversight does not depend on what the management did. The obligation of the audit committee to have its own visual eyes open, to have its own circumspection of transactions open, that nevertheless still remains. So it wouldn't be a defense for the audit committee to say that the RPT policy laid it on the management to bring transactions to the audit committee. That would be number one. Number two, you were talking about wholly on subsidies, and you were saying why these transactions at all come to, or the management feels that these transactions don't even come to the compliance officer. They are probably an insertion of not in the policy, but in the SOP, that even for the transactions which are exempt, you will anyway run it past the compliance officer for the compliance officer's view on that. That's where the SOP or the RPT policy helps. Everyone knows it's exempt, but you need to say, though it's exempt, but I would still want it to be brought to the audit committee. The third point of demerger, Nitinji, I think while it's perfectly okay that demerger, now in our view, even a demerger is an RPT. Sometimes people say demerger is not an RPT. We don't take that view. We'll say demerger also. If the other party to whom you're demerging is a related party, then demerger itself is an RPT. And there, if the exchange ratio is distorted, the exchange ratio is not basis fair valuations, that's also an RPT which is not arm's length. So I think these are the three responses to the points, Nitinji. But in the meantime, I saw, is there any other question anyone has? I also saw Vinitha has put some comment. I'm not sure if I can see, or
Yes,
anyone
sir.
else who has any point at all.
Yes, sir. Vinita ma'am has also clarified something on the DNO insurance bit. So, so far as the settlement proceedings are concerned, the settlement regulations do not permit claiming the settlement amount from DNO insurance. So there again, I think like we were talking about the reputational loss that is permanent, but for the monetary loss as well, DNO insurance may not be of avail when
No,
it
no,
comes
but
to settlement
if
proceedings.
there's one payment which is not covered by insurance, other payment is covered by insurance. You're saying penalty is covered, but settlement is not covered. I will not settle that. I'll pay penalty. At least I'll recover it from the insurance company. But either way, settlement or penalty, both are in public domain, na?
Yes.
But both are penalties more like punitive, but settlement is also, let's say we bury the matter, but is it buried in public memory? Surely not. The memory lasts for years. So anyway, the reputation loss, I think that's something that everyone understands. Okay, okay. Any other point anyone has, or is it time that we?
So good evening, sir. Dashin here.
Hi, Mr. Darshan.
Yes, sir. Speaking of RPT policy, being an NBFC listed company, so now the amendments has come in the definition of related parties. So should I include that also in my RPT policy, or how do you look at it?
Sir, the question pertains to credit risk management amendment
No,
directions.
that's not, that's different. That's different. That related party lending, that definition itself is quite different. That is not RPT within Companies Act or LODR perspective. That's a different type of lending altogether. So,
I
Mr.
think all
Darshan, no,
the
that's not
requirements with respect to that gets covered in
completely
the credit policy of the
very
respective
true.
banks or NBFCs. So that is.
So I need not bring it under RPT policy.
Not, this is not, so once again, I think let's understand that that related party lending in RBI parlance is not an RPT, not an RPT at all. It may be an RPT as well, but it's not what we intend to cover as RPT under Companies Act or LODR perspective. Because the definition there is very different. There's something called reciprocal related party, which is nowhere related to me. Anyway, I think that's a completely different definition altogether.
Okay, so one more query on the RPT policy itself. In few listed companies, the RPT policy says whoever is entering into the transaction has to inform. So how do I identify who's
For
responsible
what?
disclosing?
Or
Whoever
you
is
mean in the
entering into
business
the RPT
teams?
transaction has to inform the management, or whoever is having interest in any of the parties in which the company is entering into a transaction has to inform to their team lead or to their manager, and their manager in turn will inform the KMP.
This might probably look like more a part of the internal SOPs. The issue basically
Yes.
is how do we, I think it's SOP issue,
Yes.
because internally, how do we get to know that a transaction is being entered into by the listed entity? So internal SOPs, I think, leave it to the practicality of the organization, because one significant point is transactions are done across the country by different branches. So how does the compliance officer get to know that transaction is happening? So you'll have to create an information network, information system. So what Mr. Darshan is trying to say is that The SOP requires the relevant business team to bring it to the knowledge of the respective business head, who in turn will communicate to the compliance officer. That's, I think, a internal process flow. I don't have an issue with that.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, everyone. Payal, unless there are, okay. Thanks, everyone. And Payal, I think we can bring it to a close with all the very best and wish you
Thank you.
absolutely safe passes as a compliance officer. Thanks, Eta.
Thank you, everyone.